So we've had a change of plans. Because of events on Thursday afternoon, I'm moving this STAR skills review to Thursday, and we will move the mid-Unit 7 test to Friday when all classes are meeting. So if you take the time to go through these STAR skills, it should actually give you more help for when you take the mid-Unit 7 test on Friday. Page 1 is all about solving quadratics by factoring. It says find all possible values of the given variable. What we mean here is, if you remember, we continually had the vocabulary term zero product property. If I am multiplying two things together and getting 0 as an answer, then one of the things I'm multiplying must be 0. This is what allows us to find the x-intercepts, which are the solutions. So on number 1, what we're going to do is take each factor, set it equal to 0, and solve for x. So when we have x plus 12 equals 0, you would subtract 12 from both sides, and you would get x equals negative 12. And that's one of your answers. Then you would take the other factor, which is 2x minus 4, and you would set that equal to 0. First thing you would do is add 4 to both sides. That gives you 2x equals 4. Then divide both sides by 2, and you would get x equals 2, because 4 divided by 2 is 2. So one answer could be that x equals negative 12. The other answer could be that x equals 2. Number 6. We're going to take 5x minus 3 and set it equal to 0. Add 3 to both sides, and you get 5x equals 3. Now divide each side by 5, and you get your answer that x equals 3/5. Or you set the other factor equal to 0. 3x plus 6 equals 0. You subtract 6 from both sides, and you get 3x equals negative 6. Divide both sides by 3, and you get your final answer that x equals negative 2, because negative 6 divided by 3 is negative 2. So for number 6, your answers are that x equals 3/5 or x equals negative 2. Number 2. We'll set the first factor, d minus 10, equal to 0. Add 10 to both sides, and you get your first answer, d equals 10. Or you set the second factor, d minus 11, equals 0. You add 11 to both sides, and you get your second answer that d equals 11. Number 7. We take the first factor, 6x minus 11, and we set it equal to 0. You add 11 to both sides, and you get 6x equals 11. Divide both sides by 6, and you get your first answer that x equals 11 over 6. Or you set the second factor, x minus 7, equal to 0. You add 7 to both sides, and you find your second answer, x equals 7. Number 3. We'll set the first factor, p plus 11, equal to 0. Subtract 11 from both sides, and you get your first answer that p equals negative 11. Or you set the second factor, 3p minus 2, equal to 0. Add 2 to both sides and get 3p equals 2. Divide both sides by 3 and get our second answer, p equals 2/3. Number 8. We set the first factor, 4q plus 6, equal to 0. Subtract 6 from both sides, and you get 4q equals negative 6. Divide both sides by 4, and you get q equals negative 3/2. Or you set the second factor, q plus 7, equal to 0. You subtract 7 from both sides, and you get the second answer, which is that q equals negative 7. Number 4. We take the first factor, w minus 8, and we set it equal to 0. We add 8 to both sides, and we get our first answer, w equals 8. Or we set the second factor, 5w plus 7, equal to 0. We subtract 7 from both sides. We get 5w equals negative 7. And then we divide both sides by 5. And we get our second answer, w equals negative 7/5. Number 9. We set the first factor equal to 0. 2w plus 6 equals 0. We subtract 6 from both sides, and we get 2w equals negative 6. Divide both sides by 2, and we get our first answer, w equals negative 3, because negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. Or we take the second factor, 4w minus 1, and set it equal to 0. Add 1 to both sides, and 4w equals 1. divide both sides by 4, and get our second answer, W equals 1/4. Number 5, we take the first factor, z minus 8, and set it equal to 0. Add 8 to both sides, and we get our first answer, z equals 8. Or we take our second factor, z plus 6 equals 0, subtract 6 from both sides, and z equals -6. And finally, number 10, we take the first factor, z plus 1 equals 0, subtract 1 from both sides, and we get our first answer, z equals -1. Or we take the second factor, z minus 6 equals 0, we add 6 to both sides, and we get our second answer, z equals 6. If you have any questions about how to use factored form to find x-intercepts, please ask for clarification now so that you are better prepared for the test on Friday. Page 2, solve quadratics by factoring. Find all possible values of the given variable. So in this case, we're going to take the standard form, we're going to turn it into factored form, and then use the factored form to find the solutions, just like we did on page 1. So if we look at number 1, I know I'm multiplying two things together, and I'm getting 0 as the answer. To get s squared, I know that I'm multiplying s times s. Since the second symbol is plus, I know my signs are the same, and since my first symbol is minus, I know both my signs are minus. Now I need numbers that multiply to 21 but add to -10. We could try -1, -21, but that wouldn't work. And then we could try -3 and -7, and that would work. So -7 times -3 would be +21, and -7 minus 3 would be -10. Now that we have it in factored form, first we take s minus 7 and set it equal to 0. We add 7 to both sides, and s equals 7 is our first answer. Then we take the second factor, s minus 3, and set it equal to 0. We add 3 to both sides, and we find out our second answer is s equals 3. Number 6. We know that we're multiplying two things together, and we're getting 0 for an answer. To get k squared, this must be k times k. The second symbol being minus tells me my signs are opposite, and the first sign being negative tells me my larger one is minus. Now I need numbers that multiply to -7 but add to -6. The only factors of 7 are 7 and 1. So I'm going to make the -7 and the +1. Now -7 times 1 is -7, and -7 plus 1 is -6. Now that we have the factored form, we're going to set k minus 7 equal to 0, add 7 to both sides, and the first solution is that k equals 7. Then we set k plus 1 equals to 0. We subtract 1 from both sides, and we get our second answer that k equals -1. Number 2. Notice on this one, we do not have a c term. Since both share the b, I'm going to factor out a b, and then to get b squared, that would be b times b, and to get -10b, that would be b times -10. Now we set b equal to 0, and we have one of our solutions. And if we set b minus 10 equal to 0, we add 10 to both sides, and we get our second answer, b equals 10. Number 7. This one is done the same way. I can factor an s out of both terms, and that leaves s times s equals s squared, and s times -12 equals -12s. First, we set s equal to 0, and we have our first answer. Then we set s minus 12 equal to 0. We add 12 to both sides, and we get our second answer, s equals 12. Number 3. This is just like the previous two. We're going to factor out an x. X squared divided by x is x. 9x divided by x is 9. We set x equal to 0, and we have our first answer. We set x plus 9 equal to 0. We subtract 9 from both sides, and we get our second answer, x equals -9. Number 8. We know that we're multiplying two things together, and we're getting 0 for an answer. To get b squared, That's b times b. The second symbol being minus tells me my signs are opposites, and the first sign being minus tells me my larger factor should be the negative. So now we need factors of negative 50 that add to negative 5. So we could do 1 and 50, but that wouldn't work. We could do 2 and 25, but that wouldn't work. And we can do 5 and 10, and that would work. We're going to make the 10 negative and the 5 positive. Negative 10 times 5 is negative 50, and negative 10 plus 5 is negative 5. Now that we have factored form, we're going to set b minus 10 equal to 0, add 10 to both sides, and b equals 10. Or we set the second factor, b plus 5 equal to 0. We subtract 5 from both sides, and b equals negative 5. Number 4. Both of these share a p, so I'm going to factor out a p, and then p squared divided by p is p, and negative 12p divided by p is negative 12. First, we set p equal to 0, and we have our first answer. Then we set p minus 12 equal to 0. We add 12 to each side, and we get our second answer, p equals 12. Number 9. We know that we're multiplying two things together and getting 0. To get n squared, we have n times n. The second symbol being plus tells me my signs are the same. The first sign being negative or minus tells me both signs are minus. Now we need numbers that multiply to 5 but add to negative 6. And that would be 5 and 1. Negative 5 times negative 1 is positive 5, and negative 5 minus 1 is negative 6. Now that we have the factored form, we're going to set n minus 5 equal to 0. We add 5 to both sides, and we get n equals 5. Then we set n minus 1 equal to 0. We add 1 to both sides, and n equals 1. Number 5. Both terms share a y, so we're going to factor out a y. Y squared divided by y is y, and negative 6y divided by y is negative 6. And we set that equal to 0. First, we set y equal to 0, and we have our first answer. Then we set y minus 6 equal to 0, We add 6 on both sides, and we get our second answer, y equals 6. And finally, number 10, we know that we're multiplying two things together and getting 0. To get x squared, we multiply x times x. The second symbol being subtraction tells me my signs are opposites. The first sign being addition tells me my larger factor is going to be plus. So I need numbers that multiply to negative 84 but add to positive 5. We could do 1 and 84, but that wouldn't work. 2 and 42, but that wouldn't work. 3 and 18, but that won't work. 4 and 21, but that wouldn't work. 6 and 14, that wouldn't work. But 7 and 12 would work. So we're going to make the 12 the plus and the 7 the minus. 12 times negative 7 is going to be negative 84, and 12 minus 7 is going to be positive 5. So now that we have factored form, we're going to set x plus 12 equal to 0, subtract 12 from both sides, and our first answer is x equals negative 12. Next, we're going to take x minus 7 and set it equal to 0. Add 7 to both sides and get our second answer, x equals 7. If you have any questions about how to rewrite standard form as factored form and then solve for the solutions, which are the x-intercepts, please ask for clarification so that you are prepared for the test on Friday. And finally, page 3, we are still solving quadratics by factoring, but now we're going to take even one more step in the process. Notice that none of these standard form equations equal 0. The very first thing we need to do is set the standard form equal to 0. Then we can rewrite it in factored form, then set the factors equal to 0 and solve for x. So in number 1, we're going to add 24 to both sides. So this becomes w squared minus 13w plus 42. And we're going to set that equal to 0. Now we know we're multiplying two things together and getting 0. To get w squared, we multiply w times w. The second symbol being plus tells us our symbols are the same, and the first symbol being minus tells us both are minus. So now we need factors of 42 that add to negative 13. So we have 1 and 42, that wouldn't work. 2 and 21, that wouldn't work. 3 and 14, that wouldn't work. But 6 and 7 would work. So we have w minus 7 times w minus 6. Negative 7 times negative 6 is positive 42. And negative 7 minus 6 is negative 13. Now we take the first factor, w minus 7, and set it equal to 0. Then we add 7 on both sides, and we get the first answer, w equals 7. Then we take the second factor, w minus 6, set it equal to 0, add 6 to both sides, and we get our second answer, w equals 6. Number 6. We're going to subtract 77 from both sides. So now we have z squared plus 4z minus 77 equals 0. We know we're multiplying two things together and we're getting 0. To get z squared, we would multiply z times z. Our second symbol being subtraction tells us our signs are opposite, and the first sign being addition tells us the larger factor needs to be positive. So factors of 77 could be 1 and 77, that wouldn't work, and 7 and 11, and that would work. We're going to get 11 be positive and 7 be negative. 11 times negative 7 is negative 77, and 11 minus 7 is positive 4. Now we're going to set the first factor, z plus 11, equal to 0. We subtract 11 from both sides, and we get our first answer, z equals negative 11. Then we set the second factor, z minus 7, equal to 0. We add 7 to both sides, and our second answer is that z equals 7. Number 2. We're going to subtract 4 from both sides, and that gives us n squared plus 3n minus 4 equals 0. We know we're multiplying two things together and getting 0. To get n squared, that's n times n. The second symbol being subtraction tells us our signs are opposites. The first symbol being plus means our larger factor is going to be positive. We need numbers that multiply to negative 4 but add to positive 3, and that would be positive 4 and negative 1. Once we have it in factored form, we're going to take the first factor, n plus 4, and set it equal to 0. We'll subtract 4 from both sides, and we'll get our first answer, n equals -4. Then we'll take the second factor, n minus 1, set it equal to 0, add 1 to both sides, and get our second answer, n equals 1. Number 7. We're going to add 15 to both sides so that we have m squared plus 8m plus 15 equals 0. Now that it's set equal to 0, we can find the factored form. M squared is m times m. The second symbol being plus tells us the signs are the same. The first symbol being plus tells us they're both plus signs. Now we need numbers that multiply to 15 and add to 8. And that would be 5 and 3. Once we have the factored form, we're going to take the first factor, m plus 5, and set it equal to 0. We'll subtract 5 from both sides and get our first answer, m equals -5. Then we'll take the second factor, m plus 3, set it equal to 0, subtract 3 from both sides, and find our second solution, m equals -3. Number 3. First, we're going to add 2 to both sides so that we can set this standard form equation equal to 0. So we have z squared plus 12z plus 32 equals 0. Now we can turn it to factored form. We get z squared by multiplying z times z. The second symbol being addition tells us our signs are the same, and the first symbol being addition tells us both signs are addition. Now we need numbers that multiply to 32 and add to 12. And the numbers that would do that are 8 and 4. 8 times 4 is 32. 8 plus 4 is 12. Now we'll take the first factor, z plus 8, and set it equal to 0. We'll subtract 8 from both sides, and we'll get our first answer, z equals -8. Then we'll take the second factor, z plus 4, set it equal to 0, subtract 4 from both sides, and z equals -4. Number 8. We're going to add 72 to both sides. This gives us q squared minus 8q q equals 0. Now I can factor out a q. Q squared divided by q equals q, and negative 8q divided by q equals negative 8. So now we'll take q, set it equal to 0, and we have our first answer. Then we'll take q minus 8, set it equal to 0, add 8 on both sides, and q equals 8. Number 4. We're going to subtract 4 from both sides, and this gives us the standard form equation b squared plus b. We're going to factor a b. B squared divided by b is b. B divided by b is 1. First, we're going to set b equal to 0, and that gives us our first answer. Then we're going to set b plus 1 equal to 0. We subtract 1 from both sides, and b equals negative 1. Number 9. We're going to subtract 7 from both sides. This gives us the standard form quadratic equation n squared minus 6n minus 7 equals 0. Now we're going to factor. We're multiplying two things together and getting 0. N squared is n times n. The second symbol being minus tells us the signs are opposites. The first sign being minus tells us the bigger factor is going to be negative. Now we need numbers that multiply to negative 7 but add to negative 6. And this would be negative 7 and positive 1. Negative 7 times 1 is negative 7. Negative 7 plus 1 is negative 6. Now we're going to take n minus 7 and set it equal to 0. Add 7 to both sides, and our first answer is n equals 7. Then we take the second factor, n plus 1, and set it equal to 0. We subtract 1 from both sides, and we get our second answer, n equals negative 1. Number 5. We're going to add 110 to both sides. This gives us the standard form quadratic equation w squared minus 10w equals 0. We're going to factor out a w. W squared divided by w equals w, and negative 10w divided by w is negative 10. We set the first factor, w, equal to 0, and we have our first answer. Then we take the second factor, w minus 10, and set it equal to 0. We'll add 10 to both sides, and we find our second answer, W equals 10. And finally, our last problem, we are going to subtract 1 from both sides. This gives us the standard form quadratic equation, y squared minus 11y minus 12 equals 0. To write it in factored form, we know that y squared is y times y. The second symbol being subtraction tells us the signs are opposites. The first symbol being subtraction tells us the larger factor should be negative. Now we need numbers that multiply to negative 12 but add to negative 11. And the numbers that do that are negative 12 and positive 1. Negative 12 times positive 1 is negative 12. Negative 12 plus 1 is negative 11. Now we set the first factor, y minus 12, equal to 0. We add 12 to both sides, and we get our first answer, y equals 12. Then we set the second factor, y plus 1 equal to 0. Subtract 1 from both sides, and we find our second answer, y equals negative 1. If you have any questions about any of the factoring that we talked about in these 3 pages, please ask for clarification so that you're better prepared for the test on Friday.